always think of the gut as, I see a little battlefield where you have the good guys and the bad guys. And obviously we have the neutral guys. And you want to put food in that's going to feed the good guys because they can fight the bad guys. And you want to reduce the food that the bad guy needs to live.
The best analogy I saw, if you think of it as a garden and you've got roses and weeds in your garden, and if you want more roses and less weeds, planting roses would be like being probiotic approach, so you're putting more in. Prebiotic would be a fertilizer for the roses that kills the weeds, and the symbiotic is putting them together.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Eat, Burn, Sleep podcast. Today I have with me Professor Glenn Gibson, who has come to speak with us previously. You might have listened to the podcast about immunity and gut health, about the gut microbiome and immunity. So Professor Glenn Gibson is at the university, is a lecturer at the University of Reading. He is one of the most cited scientists in the world. He has been mentioned in over 73,000 research papers, has written 8 books, has published over 500 articles, 400 abstracts, is often ranked like the top 1% of scientists in the world, top 3% microbiologists in the UK, top 3 microbiologists, number 27 worldwide. I'm laughing because he's laughing and he feels embarrassed about his own achievements. And Professor Glenn Gibson has invented and made popular the word prebiotic. And today we're here to talk about prebiotics and probiotics. Glenn, thanks so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Hello, Yalda.
Let's start with this article in 2018, which kind of went a little viral in the world of written articles with the word prebiotic in it, and then everyone started using it, and then now you can see it, as you said earlier, on cereal boxes. So what was that article about? Okay,
it was a bit earlier than 2018. I'm showing my age again here, aren't I? It was 1995 was the first article. Was one in 2018, you're right, but that was more of a consensus among some experts in the area on behalf of a scientific organisation. So the 2018 paper is the one which has the latest definition of prebiotics, but the original one was actually right the way back in 1995. So shall I tell you the story about how it came out?
Please.
Okay, came around. So my first PhD student was called Xin. She was from China, and she was sponsored by a company in Belgium. And Xin's project, this was in Cambridge, was looking at how to boost beneficial bugs in the gut. Rather than add to them deliberately like you would with a probiotic, we're boosting using a fertilizer if you want. So as part of that, a consultant for that company in Belgium, Marcel Robefort, who's a pharmacist in Brussels, he would come to meetings to see how Xin was doing and chat. And we got on really well, Marcel and I. And aside from those meetings, we'd often meet when he was here in London. So he would come on business for whatever reason. And we'd meet in a place called the Scandic Crown Hotel, which was near Victoria. So we would sit and chat and think about things we could do, blah, blah, blah. And anyhow, one of these meetings, I said to him, this thing about boosting the beneficial bacteria which Xin is doing, we should write an article about it and maybe come up with a term, a concept. And because scientists like two things in papers, they like data, but they also like concepts. And so, I say to early career researchers now, try and write a concept article because it's a lot easier than you think, and it's the kind of thing that gets well cited. So I said to him, why don't we try this? We'll think of this concept, we'll call it something. And then he said yes, and we went away to think about what we should call it. And so we met again at the Scandic Crown Hotel later, a few weeks later, and I came up with the term Parabiotic. And the reason for this is that I felt that this would be a term where a parabiotic would be something that would help a biotic. So I based that analogy on a TV program at the time called MASH, which you're far too young to remember. But this was an American sitcom, and it was set in the Korean War, and it revolved around paramedics. And so paramedics were people who helped medics. So I thought, Parabiotic. And he didn't like it. And Marcel's older than me. And so he had the voting rights, and he came with Prebiotic instead. And I said, okay, that's dinosaur soup. So we probably want something novel. I think we should still call it Parabiotic. But anyway, we went ahead with Prebiotic. So I went home and I did the first draft of this paper in that afternoon. And it only took a couple of hours. And then I sent it to him and he made it look good. He took my ramblings and put them into something coherent. And at the time, we also put in a colour diagram. And believe it or not, in the 1990s, these were almost unheard of in colour was unheard of in research publication. You know, just had a load of text that nobody could understand. So we did that. Anyway, we wrote it, sent it. It got published in a journal called the Journal of Nutrition. And then that was it. We thought story over. But then people begun to read it. And as I mentioned to you later, Yalda, I've never really read it myself since. You know, I've had to dig it out for whatever, but I can't bear reading these things anymore. It's awful. You think, oh man, what are you thinking of? You know, these rambling abstracts in there, and you think this is awful. Anyway, it got a lot of traction, and the term began to catch on, and this was just ridiculous. And now, where we are today is that, you know, there's research conferences about prebiotics, it's on products, there's companies developing them, there's all sorts of research trials going on. And that paper, and I don't want this to sound crass, but in a journal, I think, which was published in 2019, so a little while ago, they did a big comparison of cited articles. So that citation means when somebody else quotes your research article, of all the papers that had ever been published on functional foods. So that means vitamins, minerals, probiotics, polyphenols, antioxidants. And to our complete and utter bemusement, our paper was first. It became the most highly cited paper ever published on functional foods. This is just nuts. I mean, it's a load of rubbish. It was dreamt up in a pub in Victoria. I always think, the best scientific ideas do come in pubs, by the way. So, you know, that's where we are, and that was where Prebiotics came from. But I still think I was right with Parabiotic.
My God, what an amazing story.
It's ridiculous, isn't it?
I love that. It's not ridiculous. I think it's very human.
Yeah.
A lot of genius things. Whoever created them. No, but for example, Yesterday of the Beatles, the song Yesterday, I think the first time they wrote it was something like bacon and eggs.
Yeah.
You know,
well, there's the Beatles documentary where Paul McCartney actually comes up with the genesis of that song, and they're just sitting in the recording studio like this, chatting, and suddenly it just happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, so
amazing. Yeah,
that's human creative genius.
Oh my goodness me, no way! I mean, we cannot make any analogy like that to save our lives, but it was, and that's why I say to early researchers, look at your field and think about what's missing in your field, because what was missing in our field were probiotics. Had been around for hundreds of years, but prebiotics were missing, and so we developed a concept article on that, and it's a really easy thing to write. You don't even have to have any results in it. You can just put your opinions, just sit and rabbit a load of guff. So I say to them, think, step back from your field and don't look for what necessarily is in your field. Look what's missing from your field and come up with something and write it as a concept. Do it with someone who's not in your university. Otherwise, it becomes another article from Reading or King's College or Imperial or whatever. Do it with if you want to include someone else, do it with someone in another university, preferably even in a different country, and then just sit back and see what happens.
I mean, great advice. So tell us about, so just for all the people listening to us, they have an idea of pre and probiotics are, but let's just go through the processes of what it does exactly, why it's important, where we can get them from, and then we can start discussing how to improve, the balance in our gut and how to optimize our gut health.
Of course. So probiotics are the live microbes, and they've been around in human civilization, probably not hundreds, but thousands of years. But their first scientific drive was by the work of someone called Mechnikov, Elie Mechnikov, who was a Russian scientist who was given the Nobel Prize for a thesis he called The Prolongation of Life, written in 1907. And he was a clinician. And it was really strange. It was a bit of a dichotomy because he would advocate that the large intestine was not a great organ to have in you. And he advocated actually removal of it under many, many different scenarios. But he changed his mind. And he changed his mind, the story goes, because of observations for people in Bulgaria. And he observed that they had long, healthy, kind of happy lives and wondered why. And he looked at their diet, and it all comes back to diet. And saw that they were drinking lots of sour milk. This is milk with bacteria in, which we now call today probiotics. So he wrote the thesis, The Prolongation of Life, and he changed his mind about the large intestine being the root of all evil and said, actually, this is a really positive organ. It's got lots of bacteria in, and we can adapt them with our probiotics. Not quite sure about what the people who lost their large intestine thought of this. And so they've been around a long time as live microbes in the diet. So they're popular in yogurts, other fermented milks, the little shot bottles you can get. They're in juices. You can't put them in foods that you heat because the heating will kill them. And I believe that the word itself, probiotic, means for life in Greek. So they have to be alive in the products and after ingestion. And again, a reason for developing prebiotics was to sort of circumvent some of these survival issues that you need to have with probiotics, and also allow prebiotics, which are the fertilizers, the substrates, so they grow up the ones that are in there already, which are positive for health. But you can put them in heated foods, so you can put them in baked products. I mean, I've seen prebiotic in pizza, for instance. You can put them in confectionery even, whatever you fancy. And the best analogy I saw, or one of the best ways of explaining it, was Chris Steele, the TV doctor, who said, if you think of it as a garden and you've got roses and weeds in your garden, and Chris said, if you want more roses and less weeds, planting roses would be like being a probiotic approach, so you're putting more in. A prebiotic would be a fertilizer for the roses that kills the weeds, and the symbiotic is putting them together. And I thought that was a really good way of doing it.
That's a brilliant
explaining
analogy.
it. So that's it. The live microbes are the probiotics, the fertilizers are the prebiotics, and mixtures of the symbiotics, SYN.
Amazing. I always think of the gut as, I see a little battlefield where you have the good guys and the bad guys. And obviously we have the neutral guys. And you want to put food in that's going to feed the good guys because they can fight the bad guys. And you want to reduce the food that the bad guy needs to live. And what I noticed when people start on the program that I share is there is a point where, because people don't realize we have so many bugs that a lot of what we do comes from them. It's not us. And by day 3 of, removing all the foods that can, develop bad bacteria, there are crazy cravings. There's one day where, so nutritionists call it a healing crisis, where you get worse before you get better. And I always picture that these bad guys are screaming to survive, and that's why you're craving all these foods that feed them. But as if you go over it, the battle starts going into your favor. And I oftentimes, and I don't know if I'm wrong, this is just my interpretation from my observation, what I notice is when people start setting good habits and their gut bacteria improves, when the IBS improves, when the cognitive expression of that improves, it becomes very easy for them to eat the right foods and steer clear from the bad food. And I think it's because the battle internally has been won or is in the process of being won. Do you think I'm being crazy?
No, I think if you summarize what prebiotics do, you try and boost the positives and decrease the negatives. I mean, part of the messaging, which you make a massive contribution to, of course, It's a tricky one. It's difficult because with the best will in the world, bacteria are still perceived to be negative. It immediately has a negative connotation. It's germs, kill all known germs dead, all this sort of stuff you see with disinfectants. And that's really unfair because we cannot live without bacteria. Many of the foods that we eat are made by microbes. Our gut is teeming with microbes. We would be very ill without them. They help digest about 200 grams of food that we eat each day. And the vast majority of bacteria are harmless. But the ones that get the press are the ones that do negative things. And that is always the case, isn't it? If something is negative or bad, that gets publicity.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more good news going on. My own background, I started off looking at the negative side of gut microbiology in terms of ulcerative colitis, but changed the research because the positive seemed a better spin, but there's a lot more of them. And so that's really the route that was taken. But yeah, what you described there is really what a prebiotic is meant to do.
So refrigeration happened around 100 years ago, and the bacteria around us really decreased. So, of course, the harmful bacteria that we all hear about, it reduced as well. So there was less food poisoning and things like that. But do you think that was a turning point in how we became, we started having an environment, a holobiome, a microbiome that was less rich? And what do you think we can do to improve that?
Yeah, well, I think that is a good example, but there are others throughout our existence, right from hunter-gatherer into farming communities, into the Industrial Revolution, into where we are today. All of those big changes in our culture had big changes in our diet as well, because hunter-gatherers were foragers, and there's far less of that than is the case today. And to try and understand some of this, we've been in the past working with coprolites, which are human fecal remains from our ancestors.
Amazing.
And so we've got in our labs, we've got some from a Roman dig, which is near our university in Silchester. We've got ones from a city in Turkey, which is one of the first ever cities in existence, 7,500 years ago. And also we've got some from caves in Arizona from about 4,000 years ago. And we've been looking at the bacterial profiles in these samples to try and understand the diets of our ancestors. And for instance, the Silchester, the Roman ones, there's debate over when the Romans came to this country. When did they begin to use cattle for meat as well as milk purposes? And, you can begin to trying to get some estimates of that depending on the presence or absence of milk fermenting bacteria in the gut. So that's an aside. But yeah, these step changes have really have been driven by our lifestyle as well as our diet, with the two things going together. And that clearly is going to have an effect on our gut microbial community. And the kind of things, where we are today with modern civilization is that we have a lot of mixtures of ingredients in our diets, which the microbes can break down. So when we eat something, it goes in our stomach, I don't know, for about an hour, something like that. The acid helps break it down to smaller molecules, then goes into the small intestine, which is a tube about 8 meters long in an adult. It's all curled up like a ball of spaghetti. Things go quickly through that, about 2 or 3 hours is typical. During that time, the pancreas puts enzymes in there to digest the food. Food is absorbed. Apparently, if you open up somebody's small intestine, you can cover a tennis court. So that gives you an idea of the surface. I don't know who does these experiments, but anyway, that gives you an idea of the surface area. And the bile salts help digestion. Then when you get to the large intestine, everything slows up.
Yeah.
And it takes about 2 days on average, sometimes 3 or more days, for contents to get from one end of the large intestine, which is called the cecum, to the other, which is the sigmoid rectum. And during that time, things go, as I said, very slowly through there. And that's where the bacteria begin to do their job. Because bacteria can double their numbers every 20 minutes in a favourable environment. So if you've got a situation where things are going through there very slowly in 2 or 3 days, the pH is pretty much neutral, so that's good for the bacteria. And they've got a lot of dietary ingredients coming from the host, the human, through their diet. That's an incredibly favourable environment for them to do well. And they do extremely well. And so the community is rich, it's very intense, it's very metabolically active, and that's why it can impact upon a whole variety of our disposition to disorders and our overall health status. And in terms of diet being the driver, the gut microbes, they like carbohydrate, like fibres and starches, but they're not so keen on protein and certainly not fats either.
So there was like such a talk of fiber in the social media space, and there was like this big fashion at some point with the vegan diet, and a lot of people suffering from either bloating, IBS,
Right.
and inflammatory bowel disease were kind of caught in what I call the fiber conundrum, which is, not just me, like many people, we call the fiber conundrum, which is you need the fiber, which is packed with prebiotics to feed the probiotics in your gut. But oftentimes when you have one of those pathologies, if you overdo the fiber, you get a huge bloating. And with that in mind, so that's through food, but then through supplements, some people think that when they buy probiotics, the more is more. They're like, how many billions? I need the maximum because I have huge gut issues. And they don't realize that actually it can be too much, and that can cause gas production. So can we talk about that, about the need for all these fibers that come from carbohydrates, being fruit and vegetables mainly? We're not talking about white flour right now. And about the fact that sometimes too much prebiotics and too much probiotics can have the counter effect in terms of results.
So bacteria in the gut carry out something called fermentation, which is the breakdown of their substrates, their growth promoters. And they all do this slightly differently, but it's a big concerted action, and then products are made which can be of benefit or otherwise. And, I know we're going to talk about gut-brain in a while as well, and we can come back to that. So fibers can be fermented by lots of different types of bacteria. Prebiotics can't. The key thing about prebiotics is they have to be selective. And that's the key word in a prebiotic definition. They must be selective to the beneficial communities. So fibers like pectin, xylan, cellulose, they can be generally fermented in the gut. And that's why sometimes you get gas. A prebiotic is more directed. It's more specific or selective than that. And it should be towards populations like bifidobacteria, lactobacilli, and they don't produce gas.
Understood.
However, if you take too much prebiotic, the selectivity can be compromised, and then gas producers can begin to... And that's why, people sometimes complain if they take prebiotics of gas, bloating, as you said. And that either means it's not really acting as a prebiotic or too much is being taken. And the typical dose in an adult for a prebiotic is about 4 or 5 grams only.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, so it's small. That's one thing. For the probiotics, the numbers, I really don't get hung up on... One of the big criticisms about probiotics is you take a product and not all the bacteria get down there. Well, that's probably true. But I don't really have that much of a problem with that because... in terms of pathogenic or negative microbes, it only takes a very small number to make us ill. For instance, 1 million Campylobacter can put us flat on our back for 4 or 5 days and be very nasty. And 1 million is nothing in bacterial terms. Just as low a number as 10 Shigella can give us dysentery. Yeah. So we can readily accept that pathogens at tiny doses can cause big problems. Why does it then have to be the case that for a probiotic you have to take trillions and trillions and trillions of them to get anywhere? It's not true, because bacteria can have very profound effects at low dose as long as they are functional.
I could not agree more. And that's always been my view, because I come from a place of disease. When you are ill, if something is not good, you notice it immediately. But if something is good, you notice it immediately as well. And sometimes it doesn't take much to change the balance.
Yeah.
And for prebiotics, when I was doing the research for my supplements range, my experience with inulin was very negative. Whenever I took products with inulin, I would bloat really badly. And then doing some research, I realized what you just said, that more than 4 grams do that. But less than 4 grams is really beneficial. So sometimes less can be more because you don't risk triggering anything, but you're accumulating a positive effect.
Yeah. I mean, I would say to people who take a prebiotic or want to take a prebiotic and they are experiencing these side effects, really to cut back on the dose, as long as it's a good proven prebiotic, and we can talk about that as well in a minute, just build the dose up. You know, start with 1 gram. When you tolerate that, go to 2. When you tolerate that, get yourself up to 4 or 5, which is the dose, you know, typically needed. And that you know, then the bacteria adapt. I would think that maybe, I hope you don't mind me mentioning, but you've told me before you suffered sadly from ulcerative colitis. I wondered whether at that time your populations of bifidobacteria were very low. So the inulin that you were taking was not really broken down by them, but by others, leading to the gas. Who knows?
Oh, probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
Possibly.
Thanks for that, yeah.
I don't know.
yeah, but possibly.
You want to watch it because I'll be asking for some samples to take back to the lab.
I'm much better now. I can eat now I can eat anything. And actually, you know what? I don't want to jinx myself saying this, but being able to eat anything is hard because now I have to exercise willpower.
Oh, right. Okay. But you'd rather have that.
So it was kind of easy before to stay like fit because I couldn't have this, couldn't have that. And also, you know how there's this book called The Paradox of Choice. We are in a society where we have too much choice and it can become debilitating.
Right.
When there are so many things you can't eat, it makes menus in restaurants very easy to navigate.
Okay. Great. Nice.
Every cloud has a silver lining. Thank you for listening so far. We'll be continuing this conversation in part 2, so make sure you're subscribed to the Eat, Burn, Sleep podcast so you do not miss it. In the meantime, for those of you who are not members of the platform yet, we have a discount code for all our podcast listeners. You can get 15% off all Eat, Burn, Sleep memberships. Just enter the code podcast15 at checkout on the memberships page on eatburnsleep.com. We still have so much more to cover, so please stay tuned.